turn on your, yeah, we're going to do a recording just for internal purposes. We're not putting it online, but or we are putting it on YouTube. We are putting it on YouTube. We are live now. We're on YouTube. This is it. If you like more of this, subscribe below. Yes. Okay, let's go. So everybody turn your cameras on just so that Ye knows who she's talking to before she, it'd be nice to, it's just nice to give some faces, context to the blank screens. And I'll just do a proper introduction of Fei meanwhile. So Feifei Zhou is a Chinese-born spatial and visual designer, graduated from the RCA actually, right? Quite recently. And so she's a guest researcher at Aarhus University research on the Anthropocene aura, during which she co-edited the digital publication Feral Atlas. So I've gone on and on about the Feral Atlas with you. Anat Singh, she collaborated with Anat Singh and a couple of other people to create the Feral Atlas, which I highly recommend for those of you who haven't browsed it, please do. Is also there's also a publication with it called Feral Atlas, the More Than Human Anthropocene from the Stanford University Press. Her work explores spatial, cultural, and ecological impacts of the industrialized, built, and natural environment. She previously taught at Central St. Martin's, University of the Arts in London, and she's currently a visiting critic at the College of Architecture, Art, and Planning at Cornell University. So thank you, Feifei, so much for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Anam, for the introduction. Very interesting. Now I've heard you describing a course. I've prepared a presentation, but I actually have another project I would really love to just discuss, which I will maybe move on to that after my prepared presentation. So please bear with me. Okay, so let me share my screen.
Please mute yourselves, everybody. Who's this? Okay. Can you mute, Elizabeth?
I think Nicole is, yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, Faye,
thank
you.
Yeah, I would want to just present a few projects and discussing, I guess, the idea of salvaging architecture, as well as my kind of method of a methodology for practice using drawing, and now kind of moving beyond drawing, and how that combining with narrative-based illustrations can discuss some of these concepts in the Anthropocene, especially architecturally in the built environment. And obviously, to touch on the topic, I would love to present my student graduate project at the RCA in 2018. So this is a project that kind of very much inspired by Anna's book, Mushroom at the End of the World. Maybe some of you have heard of it or read. That really formed the theoretical framework of my architecture design, put in the foundation of my later collaboration with Professor Anna Singh. So here it goes. The forest surrounding the Tibetan town of Shangri-La, southwest China, was intensively logged during the 1960s. Following a ban on logging, these forests were left abandoned and severely damaged. And the shattered ecosystem of this exploited landscape fostered the growth of the matsutake mushroom, one of the most valuable mushrooms, edible mushrooms in the world. The matsutake's value stems from the scarcity of the appropriate growing conditions. The symbiotic relationships of the matsutake with their host trees is unable to be artificially replicated, rendering these mushrooms essentially non-cultivable. The yellow circles here indicates the natural locations of the matsutake growth in Yunnan province, China. These mushrooms only grow in disturbed landscapes. blooming the footprints left by grazing animals or the scars left by logging activities. These disturbances create a unique ecology that provide ideal conditions for the growth of matsutake mushrooms and their host trees. The value of these mushrooms also encouraged commercial and social forms of exploitation. The section here shows the soil composition, as well as how the mycelium of the matsutake forms its a symbiotic relationship with its host trees, namely the pines and oak shrubs. They normally fruit under a relatively thick layer of forest litter, which make them really hard to find. Matsutake mushroom are best consumed within 48 hours of being harvested, as the high-end market in Japan has preferred. The enormous international demand for these fungi, together with the unique ecological conditions needed for the growth, has created an extremely complex commodity chain, which involves several stages of middlemen who exploit local Tibetan foragers as cheap labor. And here it shows a cross-regional transaction of these mushrooms getting kind of sorted, sold, packaged, cleaned, and shipped to abroad. So the project aims to rework the existing natural and mercantile ecologies. As a response, the design intervention begins with 7 sites in around the forest of Shangri-La. These architectures reconfigure the existing commodity chain by allowing for the local matsutake workers to inhabit the forest, grade and sort the fungi, and directly ship external markets via an international shipping center. Depending on the context, these 7 sites are categorized by ecology existing within the forest, pasture, or close to the existing farming activities. And the form of the architecture doesn't really follow any prescribed rules. It follows the rhythm of the forest. These 3 animations show the design intervention on the 3 typologies of the sites: forest, near farm, and pasture. In spring, the forests are thinning in order to allow sufficient sunlight for the pines and oak shrubs, which in turn allow the mycelium to grow. In summer, the villagers built the matsutake center using thicker older pines for pole foundations and the thinner ones as floorboard and facades. In autumn, when the mushroom season arrives, the center serves as a sorting center during the day and temporary accommodation at night. In winter, when the matsutake season ends, buildings are taken down or converted into other useful structures. Wood are recycled as firewood during the winter, and next year it repeats. So this is a basis for a set of build proposals which attempt to align the metabolism with the cycle and seasonal pattern of the year. Is architecture emerging, aging, dying, and re-emerging with the trees, the matsutake, and its surrounding context? And looking back, the projects in some ways appear naive and perhaps could do with a bit more thought and sensitive approaches. But it is this exact naive first attempt of trying to tell really big stories with very small details has begun the starting point of my career of producing large-scale drawings to explain a complex geopolitical issue and environmental injustice across scale, chronology, and location. So naturally, I kind of proceed to talk about Fair Atlas, which also kind of followed very closely after my graduate project. As some of you might know, this is a digital publication that came out in November 2020. We published with Stanford University Press. I worked with 3 anthropologists, Anna Singh, Jennifer Deeger, Outdas Kerem Saxena, working on this truly kind of cross-disciplinary, multi-genre collaboration on investigating the Anthropocene, but through this kind of different approaches. So there's about over 200 collaborators, volunteers, contributors altogether. And Fair Atlas essentially talk about the kind of the Fair effects, which are the non-designed effects of infrastructures, which somehow get tangled up in the ecological world. So we're very much into this undesigned, unintentionally created hard to control kind of environmental effects that perhaps planners, architects, and engineers might not have predicted or understood before. So what does the Feifei effect mean? Just quick examples. How do these wooden pallets, which we are kind of so familiar with every day, get tangled up with emerald ash borer and actually brought diseases, plant epidemics across the globe? So ecologist Marisa Weiss investigated the disease kind of partner up with emerald ash borer on the ash trees, which used as this kind of timber material getting shipped around. So if you pay attention to this diagram, as a global shipping route is actually also the diagram of where the emerald ash borer and also infested trees, timber, has been traveling around. Another example, how did these oceanic kind of onshore, offshore ocean infrastructures get tangled up with the jellyfish polyps and actually created a jellyfish invasion? Marine biologist Martin Feifei and his team investigated these jellyfish that during its reproduction cycle in the system, at a certain stage, require them to be attached to a vertical surface. Because it's so rare in the natural environment, it controlled the kind of numbers of their reproduction. But since the boom of these ocean infrastructures accidentally provided these cantilever and vertical surfaces that is unprecedented and pretty rare to find in the natural environment, and actually enabled the fast reproduction of jellyfish, creating invasions, not only killing fish and other ecosystems, as well as clogging into boats, vents of other infrastructures and causing damage. So we kind of compiled 79 field reports, each, speaking about these feral ecologies at different parts of the world from a different perspective. So if you click in one of the entities in the atlas, it had this detonation and taking you to one of these Anthropocene data landscapes, which essentially compile all these infrastructure works we are talking about and more. So you can zoom in of the drawings to kind of start reading into the particular narratives within the overall overarching kind of analytical framework. So we have 4 of the Anthropocene data landscapes. If you've been to the website, you might have browsed through some of them. They each were kind of made from a specific perspective of imaginative or imagined individual or collective's perspective. So the way the drawings are kind of created is through these lenses of the individuals, imagining if you were them, how would you view the world? And this is exactly why we kind of presented these 4 kind of worlds of the Anthropocene through these 4 very different perspectives. They are titled Invasion, Empire, Capital, and Acceleration. Each are the kind of describing the founding conjunctures that started these new ways of seeing and building infrastructures. So I'm just going to talk very quickly about 2 of the drawings, kind of leading you through the kind of reading of these landscapes. So imagine yourself as the explorer to an unexplored landscape. Starting from the right is kind of before arrival. You have the Santa Maria ship that took Christopher Columbus across the Atlantic Ocean for the first time. You have the British Man-O-War. You have the Japanese described black ship, which describing his Western invaders ship. Then arriving at the shore where these conflicts are happening. This is a collaboration with Aboriginal Australian artist Nancy McDinney, describing this vivid scene of her great-grandfather defending the land against the first wave of European mining prospectors. And these kind of non-human forms of resistance, of violence also happens. This is the burning of the Amazon for the cattle farming. And you can see the cattle marching towards the burned, deforested Amazon. And then arriving on the right of this kind of perfectly curated, modified European garden-like houses in an American suburb. But this kind of resistance towards invasion is still happening today. This is a reference of the actual bridge in Canada, in one of the First Nation territories, of them kind of have this graffiti on saying this is Indian land. And these two kind of collaborations, this is Nancy McDinney's collaboration we talked about on the right, as well as First Nation artist Andy Everson's painting as well, which described this melting glacier that was really significant for his hometown and community, but is melting due to climate change. And coming to the second landscape I'm talking about, which is Empire. So Empire presents kind of slightly different perspective, that if you imagine yourself as imperial surveyor, you are kind of standing on top of the hill, trying to investigate what can happen to the landscape through the imperial force. So closer to you are these kind of vernacular local kind of crops such as cassava and rice, but slowly kind of being merged into colonial crops such as opium and tea and teak plantation. I'm not sure if you can see, but is George Well shooting an elephant just below that red circle. And you slowly emerge into this full-scale plantation, such as teak on the left and sugarcane on the right. In the middle, where these kind of water infrastructure projects happening, modifying the waterscape. So you have dams, botanical gardens, water channels, dredging, and all the other kind of projects. And then arriving to the shore, which is more kind of imperialized and militarized. You have forts, storages. You also have different kind of other colonial establishment. Some of you might notice some very familiar kind of architecture, significant architecture, such as Trafalgar Square. You have the London Bridge. You have the Natural History Museum. And I just want to mention quickly about this kind of hybrid island with this kind of combination of features from southern US and the Great Caribbean, with this sugar cane, which pretty much was this painful history of kidnapping African bodies for specific kind of plantation, and have this juxtaposition of this cruise ship, which, you know, kind of the ecotourism that's now kind of pretty much dominate a large portion of the landscape in the Great Caribbean, for these different forms of exploitation for the human and non-human resources happening at different times through different forms, but still going on. And this collaboration on Empire is with architect and artist Larry Botchway, who is British Ghanaian, whose early research looked at the palm oil plantation in Ghana and how these kind of European-owned big industrial agriculture companies using this form of contract to kind of tie local villages them up of the palm oil plantation. So they were kind of pretty restrained and stuck into this contract-based system. And he's kind of using his graphic to show the resistance of this contract by pretty literally illustrating them tearing the contract on the background. I just want to quickly touch upon this course. I'm I'm teaching currently at Cornell using the material of infrastructure from Fair Atlas. So we kind of started teaching students through step-by-step different kind of key concepts from Fair Atlas, and they each pick a non-human entity to study the Faro effects around. They were introduced with the concept of tippers. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it, which essentially are states of modes of infrastructure state changes. These kind of one-syllable verbs describing the action of what the work's infrastructure were designed and supposed to do, through there to discover what kind of Faro effects they created as a byproduct.
These are brine shrimp, a tiny microcrustacean found in both seasonal and year-round water bodies. They feed on planktonic algae and are an essential part of the food chain for migratory birds. Brine shrimp have developed reproductive adaptations, including the production of tiny cysts that act as dormant eggs, surviving up to 5 years. The shrimp cysts are a global industry for aquaculture, sold internationally as a form of live feed once incubated. Brine shrimp have also adapted to live in saline environments and can withstand salt concentrations up to 10 times that of seawater, allowing them to thrive in water bodies such as the Salton Sea in California. However, with a set window of tolerable saline and temperature conditions, environments experiencing accelerated hypersalinity can also impact the food web of local ecosystems. Hypersaline water bodies created by human activity have undoubtedly been linked to water infrastructure at the larger scale. In the quest to control water flow and distribution, the material constructions of aqueducts, pipes, dams, and wells in turn affect the landscape, waterscape, and airscape. In Southern California, these enormous public water infrastructures are contributing to the tipping points of contentious water issues to mitigate drought and water shortages. Historically, the Salton Sea's water level was maintained through freshwater input coming from agricultural drainage, but since 2003, a water transfer deal was signed and the quantification settlement agreement defined water rights to the Colorado River for the next 75 years. However, previous irrigation and drainage methods have already depleted the water table, and with water now being diverted to Southern California counties, the sea's salinity has dramatically increased. For comparison, the Salton Sea is over 50% more saline than the Pacific Ocean, a percentage still increasing. Since the water settlement deal, the Salton Sea's water level has also receded immensely, causing numerous environmental and social impacts. The drying lake bed now also exposes toxic particulate matter accumulated in the playa, and combined with regional winds, airborne toxins are circulating via dust storms around the Imperial and Coachella valleys, resulting in developmental health conditions such as childhood asthma. The ecological disturbances are equally concerning. As a terminal water body, the Salton Sea's increasing salt and nutrient concentrations are only accelerating changes to the lake's ecosystem. Large-scale algal blooms are ultimately leading to lower levels of dissolved oxygen, causing massive fish die-offs. This in turn affects the food chain for avian life and their migratory stopping points along the major Pacific flyway route. The tipping point of the Salton Sea currently hinges on human activity catalyzing ecological state changes. The consequences of infrastructural effects span from disruptions in local food chains to global aquaculture and trickle-down effects from state policies to regional health impacts.
So this is one of my students, Jessica Lee's video describing these kind of tippers as, I guess, grid, take and burn of this activities going on in around the Salton Sea. We're looking at the kind of site research, and this is also her thesis project, which she will kind of progress to looking at the design.
Ice plants are succulent native to South Africa, which have been introduced to California's coastal ecosystem. They favor the loose soil of sand dunes and moisture from the ocean. This has led to their explosion of growth in the environment, sweeping the entire length of California and up into Oregon. Leaving a splattering of colors ranging from green to pink, blossoming and carpeting the land. They were introduced in the 20th century by railroad operators to stabilize California's loose coastal land and to expedite and secure passage across the state. Later, with the introduction of trucking and passenger vehicles, ice plants were grown along highways to perform a similar job. To this extent, ice plants have been utilized to secure the land and infrastructure in order to optimize the ability for humans to take and propel commerce. Their use has tipped the native ecosystem. Ice plants are hardy plants which grow at a rapid pace, allowing them to multiply, expand, and produce large fields, which choke out native plants. Many movements are underway to remove ice plants. However, the task is large, the work is hard, and unforeseen consequences are turning up at startling rates.
We have some incredible drone video to show you from Pacifica.
As the cliffs in Pacifica, California collapse dramatically into the ocean.
For many years, ice plants prevented soil erosion as their roots knotted and solidified the soil. Over time, buildings were built closer and closer to cliff sides, removing the ice plants. Now, as cliffs get bombarded by waves, they begin to crumble as the safety net which humans introduce has been eradicated and left looser and more dangerous conditions. This tipping is paralleled to infrastructural change 3,000 miles away in Ithaca, New York. The ash tree. It accounts for 30% of all trees in the area and a substantial home for many organisms. Its soaring trunk has graced forests and our cities, and their canopies have provided shade and spaces for contemplation. But
These trees are doomed.
this menace is the emerald ash borer, a beetle originally found on the continent of Asia. Believed to have come to the United States via larvae in pallets, our need for global trade and take has endangered our forests, as the ash has been unable to defend itself against the emerald ash borer. Borers feed on the leaves and burrow just below the bark, leaving S patterns. In response, the trees feverishly produce new, short branches to give it more strength in fighting off the borer. However, emerald ash borers easily overcome the trees in sheer number and move on to the next ones, making it so the only true defense is investigation in forests, and either injecting with pesticides or cutting down all affected trees. The hope is that one tree out of 80,000 remaining will have a genetic mutation that is resistant to the damage of the emerald ash borer. This may save the ash tree. However, humans' demand for growth, globalization, and infrastructural take continues to put the species and many more under threat as we further tip out of balance with nature.
So this is Andrew Bohosian's video on comparing these two entities. He found one in the distance kind of point of view. One is in Ithaca, New York, where we are right now. And this is his drawing kind of describing the similar manner through kind of global or national transportations in a two different kind of slightly manner, how these two feral entities get tangled up with the transportation system and spread around in this unexpected method. And some of the students are trying kind of other methods of drawing as well. So there's Steffi, who's trying to use hand drawings to describe the linear movement, the kind of methods of drawing to describe the story of deer, comparing with, I suddenly forgot the name of squirrels, and how they were kind of forced to evict from their natural habitats and kind of wander around in marginalized areas, somehow kind of being reintroduced into urban environment, such as suburban New York, for this kind of romanticized lifestyle, and living off kind of urban gardens, domestic garbage, as their kind of new livelihood practices. So this is my newest project, which has been an ongoing collaboration with anthropologists based in UCSC, that's University of California, Santa Cruz. Shifting Porosity is one of the most kind of up-to-date project that emerged out of that kind of main scope of collaboration with Zahira Sohaimi, who is a PhD candidate, as well as Jeffrey Salim, who is an indigenous photographer based in Singapore. So Shifting Porosities specifically looked at the Zhou Strait. So if you see this kind of, I don't know if you can see my cursor, not really. The main island just below is Singapore, and what's above it is the Johor of Malaysia. And this kind of thin channel that just divides Singapore and Malaysia is Johor Strait. And there has been indigenous communities living around there for centuries, namely Olan Asli. So we're specifically looking at the Olan Saleta communities and kind of trying to understand the changes over their livelihood practices and also other non-human livelihood practices through the process of industrialization. So, legends has it, in Johor's history, it rained for a whole month non-stop. As much of the land was submerged, many tribes of Olan Asli moved to boats to avoid animals like tigers and crocodiles. When the tide retreated, Olan Saleta settled around the rivers. According to various folk tales, Olan Saleta culture was nurtured by rich amphibious ecosystems, primarily mangroves. The dynamic porosity shifted when plantation reshaped the landscapes of Johor. During the mid-19th century, Gambia plantation quickly came to dominate Johor's near water regions, growing partnership with pepper, replacing mangroves. These are where the Gambia plantation were located by the colonial plantation owners. The Gambian extraction process required boiling leaves, and the planters turned to mangrove trees as resources for firewood and charcoal. Global demand has boomed this extremely exhausting cultivation process, which turned lands into wasteland within only 20 years. With the disappearance of mangrove forests as multi-species shelter nurseries, the Olan Saleta were forced to seek livelihood elsewhere. Porosity today has become toxic and dangerous. The construction of the new highway facilitated new coastal infrastructure projects such as land reclamation, dams, seawalls, and luxury housing, which blocked water exchange in some places while excavating the mixing of chemical and physical dump in others. While the intensification of industrial fishing and mussel cultivation, the Olan Saleta find it challenging to maintain their traditional livelihood practices of fishing, hunting, and foraging. With limited access, they largely rely on local Chinese and Malay middlemen to sell their daily catches to urban restaurants and markets. In this extractive landscape, both humans and non-humans struggle to adapt to this constantly shifting porosity. I have another project which I could quickly talk about if we have time.
Yes, we do. If you have time, we should just leave about 10 minutes or so for questions, but please do share.
Okay. I just found this project might be really helpful in my mind for your studio. So maybe I can just really quickly talk about it. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. This is the kind of previous collaboration with Seacoast, which is this research collective in UCSC. This particular one was Kirsten Keller, based on her year-long research in Jakarta, but it's very much talking about actually the physical and invisible kind of chemical dumps and physical garbage that in around Jakarta Bay and how it gets tangled up with human and non-human lives. So I'm just going to go in straight away. Jakarta has a problematic dualistic land tenure system where the urban poor often inhabit marginalized lands with informal land rights, making them vulnerable to eviction to make way for formal property development. So here we are looking at a a fishing village called Mura, which is one of those marginal lands I talked about. Located on the coast, it is home for large informal settlements or small-scale traditional fish persons. These kind of semi-permanent self-built structures, which are kind of double shaded here, are invisible to GIS maps and largely obscured from the views of upper class society. And here we're looking at the Jakarta Bay map extending to the inner city here. Jakarta's many waterways are severely contaminated by unfettered dumping of untreated wastewater. And the three key sources of the pollutions are the domestic sewage, industrial effluent, and agricultural runoff. And innumerous pollutants flow into the nutrient-rich, heavy metal-laden soup through small water channels and then connect to the larger rivers and eventually drain into the ocean from the Jakarta Bay. And meanwhile, the lack of solid waste management leads to a huge amount of garbage piling up in rivers and at the peripheries of informal settlement. Polluted surface water and unreliable sewage cause extensive private drilling for deep groundwater. An unregulated overconsumption of groundwater causes rapid land subsidence in Jakarta, the city sinking into the sea. And just January this year, Indonesia has announced they're going to move their capital from Jakarta to a newly formed city in Borneo Island. As a result, massive coastal protection infrastructures has been planned. However, the onshore seawalls, which are the thick black line across the coast, and the proposed offshore seawalls are the white lines, actually will enclose Jakarta Bay, trapping contaminated water and garbage into a giant lagoon, destroying the marine ecology upon which fishermen depend, which is already happening. So over the past 40 years, wastewater infrastructures has diminished the viability of fishermen's livelihood practices in Jakarta Bay. However, the Asian green mussel here has provided a hardier alternative for many. As filter feeders, green mussel consumed suspended particles in the water column, feeding on excessive nutrient, toxic algae, and heavy metals. They not only survive, but can thrive in toxic environments. And green mussel cultivation using bamboo structures kind of driven into the seafloor in shallow waters has become an important source of livelihood for thousands of Jakarta's fishermen. Yet, as they cultivate, shuck, and eat the mussels, they're exposed to the toxins the mussels have also absorbed, namely heavy metal and algal toxins. Meanwhile, the mussel processing generates vast amounts of discarded shells, which are either used as reclamation material for creating new informal lands and combating coastal substance, which are showing here, or getting piled up, trapped behind a seawall. So this is a project just came to my mind that could be interesting for your studio, discussing this kind of flowing of different toxins getting mixed up and getting redistributed, you know, not just in a physical land and waterscape, but also inside human bodies and other non-human bodies.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
And terrifying. Thank you, Faye. Thank you, really. Thank you for this brilliant talk and sharing your work with us. So we do have 15 minutes for questions or comments or this burning question regarding your own project. I can see Johannes' hands shot up straight away. Go for it. Is that all right, Faye?
Yeah, of course. I'm in another grid, so I just need to be back around my 11, but I have 17 minutes.
So let's wrap up about, say, give you a moment to breathe. Let's wrap up at 4 minutes to the hour so that you have.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds great.
You're welcome. All right.
Thank you very much for the talk. It was really interesting, and also I loved kind of the big visualizations, and I just wanted to ask, how do you kind of, if you have like this huge story you obviously plan to tell with kind of the end outcome, how do you go about that? Is it kind of a process of like the separate pieces and fitting them together, or is it more like a big plan ahead in front?
Yeah, I would say each drawing is a fragment or a section of a research project. These are very much based on collaborations of the scientists' field-based research, which post-pandemic, I'm going to do the research myself, and the drawings might very much evolve in very different kind of aesthetics or methodologies. But just based on these existing collaborations, that it always started with a panic. It's quite a manic state that I don't know, I have so much material and we have to make this one drawing. We don't know where to start. So by actually selecting research materials, forming a kind of overarching narrative that have these small stories bearing inside, is selecting the kind of most, I wouldn't say important, but important for the drawing's sake material and forming this narrative. So it actually doesn't quite conclude the overall research. It is kind of take an aspect that we try to kind of analyze through the drawing. And the same kind of research that they've done, they spend years in, say, Jakarta or Zhou, we can actually come up with another drawing that describing a different aspect, which we're actually working on it. So I guess this is also a practice through my architecture training, is that we always can forever doing research nonstop. At one point, for the school's sake, of our own sake, we'll have to come up with something, solidify the research and coming into design. So there is this kind of decision-making process of what's your project is about, what do you want to show the most, and how does all the information benefit the project itself, rather than kind of distracting or confusing the story.
Right, it's beautiful, absolutely stunning drawings. Okay. Anybody else? Question?
Yes, maybe I have a question. So I guess you started with producing these visualization, these collages, these drawings, because you wanted to do it. That was your form of expression. But has it switched to commissioned work now, or are you solely doing self-chosen topics? And what is your forum? Where does this end up being or existing?
Yeah, I'm getting commissions. I'm still deciding on that. I'm just so fascinated by what the other people's research are doing, and I'm formalizing, my own research as well. So I got this grant to actually get to go to Southeast Asia next year after this long break because of the travel restrictions, and I'm really excited about it. And I do see that as my practice, and I don't see drawings as the only methodology. It's probably the most comfortable, let's say, format of representation for now, because I've been doing it for a little while. But just yesterday, I was discussing how I really want to try other methods. To me, is whatever benefits the story, is not whatever benefits kind of my own comfortability in conveying the story. So as you can see, maybe my very kind of initial, not so competent way of animating the drawings as a first step of seeing how moving image combining with my own words can perhaps complement the storytelling aspect. And that's kind of the beginning step of that chapter, and I would really love to kind of evolve into other aspects. Right now, all these kind of collaborations are coming out of conversation. So perhaps I've done Fair Atlas, and then seeing who I've been collaborating intensively said, I'll have another project. Would you like to actually jump on this Southeast Asian land-water interaction project? Amazing. And then there might be kind of other people who've invited me just for the drawing aspect. It's still great, but my priority will be this kind of research-based storytelling as a methodology for practice.
I have one question, Faye, which is, I think, perhaps relevant to the brief as well, is what you've done in More Than Human Atlas, Feral Atlas, and what Anat Singh has talked about a lot is the idea of the patchy Anthropocene, and that actually it is because of the ruins of the Anthropocene that we are going to be able to do what we are able to do, and that whole story of the cliffs collapsing because of the invasive plant that humans had planted and then started removing is a very powerful example. In this project, I'm trying to get to reframe the idea of what waste is, in a sense that this is actually meaningful to us. And could you talk a little bit to that idea of how you represent that, but how you also think about what is actually the waste of the Anthropocene, and that actually it's not waste, and it is so integral to our futures?
This is quite a heavy question.
Sorry.
I guess I'm just gonna kind of speak out loud, so it might not necessarily make the most sense. Waste and also, you know, ruin, or these words coming with certain kind of value behind. Waste defined by, I guess, capitalist system is something that perhaps are not usable or functional or has value to it. But I think after looking at so many kind of case studies, that waste is not necessarily waste. Waste has values depending on how you want to interpret it. And even comparing to kind of tree to tree, animals to animal, born at different places, using different kind of phenomena, they have different kind of financial value behind it. So it's about, I guess, us as in people who are intervening the projects, how we define value in our sense and how we want to use it. And there's certain kind of, the system right now we're in is kind of designed for us to kind of fast forward, skipping certain processes. And now into individual projects, actually how to slow it down and how to actually make more effort. And I think that was what's missing right now with perhaps some of the projects is, let's get the cheapest material possible. Let's get it done as fast as possible without kind of looking into these processes, into these chain effects happening in between. And that's what is causing the Anthropocene, is these kind of forgetting to understanding the relationships between the cause and the effects. So I guess I'm not really answering the question of the waste, but I think is to question what is waste to start with, is kind of the critical starting point for me. And once you kind of started to abandon the value system coming or invented by the kind of financial standard of what defines each object, each ecosystem, it will be kind of used in the, or kind of new ideas will come out of it. And interesting kind of example with these imitation banks, you know, in around the US now it's applied elsewhere, is actually putting kind of certain species, ranking them from up and down in terms of their financial value and how they can be traded for this like mitigation strategy, you know, for companies who might destroy a wetland or who might, you know, airlines, you know, flying the mileage and plant a tree without understanding the general ecosystem that take time. Again, it's like the fast forward methodology of making these comforting method of, oh, we are doing something positive. So is talking about Anthropocene is about time and is about long-term effects, which I think the strategy also would take time and would take patience.
Thank you. We are about 3 minutes to the hour, so I was going to ask a few minutes. Is there any last burning question? Otherwise, we should let Faye go. No? You have the references, and I'm sure
I think Stefan is trying to talk, but I think you're on mute, or maybe.
There are two thumbs. Which one?
Oh,
Is this Stefan Sim? Or
No,
Zinel?
it was
oh
not.
no,
No?
maybe it's the other one. Oh, it doesn't matter. Sorry, I just thought.
Okay.
Yeah.
No. I can't see anyone, but I think we should all thank Faye for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you very much for
Faye.
the invitation.
And hope you have a good rest of your day and keep doing the inspiring work you do.
Thank you. I'd love to see what comes out of the studio at the end. It very
Yeah.
intriguing brief.
Yeah. We will definitely keep you in the loop. Love to hear your thoughts. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone.
Bye,
for
thank you.
coming. Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.